It was supposed to be just another late-night show, lights, laughs, and a charismatic movie star plugging his next blockbuster. But when Michael B. Jordan sat across from Jimmy Kimmel, the smiles were a lie. What the cameras didn't catch was the fire already burning backstage, and what they did catch changed everything. A single moment, one cutting remark, one unfiltered reaction, and the illusion shattered. What made one of Hollywood's most composed actors storm off national television? And did it really start that night? Or was it years in the making? The day began like any other press tour commitment for Michael B. Jordan. Call times, wardrobe fittings, a well-rehearsed list of talking points to sprinkle with just enough charm to keep the audience entertained. As his black SUV pulled up to the El Capitan Theater, fans gathered outside screamed his name, waving posters and cell phones, trying to capture even a glimpse of the star they'd come to admire not just for his roles, but for what he stood for off-screen. Michael smiled, waved, and stepped into the building. Inside, the atmosphere was colder. The air conditioning hummed over the low chatter of staff preparing for the evening's taping. It wasn't Michael's first time on Jimmy Kimmel Live. In fact, he had been on the show 3 times before. But tonight, something was different. As he was led down the hall to his dressing room, he passed Jimmy's office, the door cracked just wide enough to catch a clipped remark. "Let's just not let him get too preachy tonight, yeah." It was Jimmy's voice, unmistakably joking, but there was an edge to it. Michael paused for a beat, then walked on, his smile dimming only slightly. Back in his dressing room, Michael sat in silence while a stylist fussed over his shirt collar. His publicist ran through notes, emphasizing light topics, his recent boxing training for a role, a viral TikTok challenge, a joke about dating. But Michael's mind drifted elsewhere, to the meeting he had with a community youth group earlier that day, to the message he wanted to share, not just the movie he was promoting. He looked into the mirror, the reflection of a man who had spent years walking the tightrope between activism and expectation. Fame was supposed to give him a platform. More often, it felt like a muzzle. A knock on the door announced 5 minutes until showtime. He nodded, stood, and adjusted the sleeves of his tailored jacket. As he was led to the green room, the chatter around him faded into a blur of neon signs and camera cables. He caught glimpses of cue cards, laughter rehearsals, and production assistants rehearsing monologues. Everything was tightly controlled, carefully curated, except the storm brewing inside him. Jimmy walked by, flashing his signature grin. "You ready to go, champ?" he said, patting Michael on the shoulder with forced familiarity. Michael chuckled politely, but the tension between them was tangible, unspoken. It was more than nerves. It was knowing he wasn't just being invited to laugh on cue, he was being measured, filtered, judged, and maybe even baited. He sat quietly in the green room, watching the live feed of the show's intro segment. Jimmy joked with the crowd, tossing zingers about Hollywood egos and celebrity meltdowns. Michael's eyes narrowed as he caught the phrase "Hollywood's most serious leading man," here to remind us about feelings. The crowd laughed. Michael didn't. His jaw tightened. It was a throwaway line to most, but to Michael it felt like a subtle dig, an effort to undermine his seriousness, to reduce his causes to punchlines. He glanced at the clock. 30 seconds until his entrance. He rose slowly, rolling his shoulders back, preparing himself not just for an interview, but for a battle he didn't sign up for. When the cue came, he stepped out into the lights with a practiced grin, the applause washing over him like white noise. Cameras rolled, and the world saw a man in control. But behind the eyes, something had already cracked. The walls of the green room were thin, cheap plaster pretending to muffle secrets, but in reality, amplifying every word not meant to be heard. Michael sat on the couch, sipping water from a bottle he'd opened twice and never really drank from. His eyes flicked to the television monitor showing the live feed, but he wasn't watching anymore. His mind was tethered to the sound of voices drifting in from the corridor. One was Jimmy's. The other, a producer named Kyle, someone Michael had met a handful of times during past appearances. They weren't yelling. That would have been easier to confront. Instead, they were speaking in the smug, conspiratorial tone of 2 men who thought they were safe, who thought the subject of their conversation was far enough away not to hear. "I mean, what's he gonna do? Cry on air again?" Jimmy said, followed by laughter, low, but pointed. Every interview's a TED Talk now. The dude can't just talk about a movie without reminding us his Malcolm X with abs. Michael didn't move. Didn't even blink. But inside, the words struck bone. He stared ahead, vision tunneling. Kyle chimed in, laughing harder. Yeah, and don't get him started on representation. My God, I get it, bro, you're black and famous, move on. There was a pause, then the unmistakable clink of glasses. Toasting something. Toasting him. That's when the audio cut out, not literally, but mentally. Michael's heartbeat began to drown everything out. Not the first time he'd heard something like it. But it hit differently tonight. Because tonight, he wasn't an unknown kid from Newark clawing for a shot. He wasn't just another name in the credits. He was Michael B. Jordan. And even now, even here, they laughed at his voice like it was an inconvenience. He stood slowly, as if rising too fast would let his emotion leak out. He walked to the door, hand resting on the knob, hesitating. Part of him wanted to storm in, call them out, burn the whole room down with truth. But something stopped him. Not fear, restraint. The hard-earned discipline of a man who spent a decade learning when to bite back and when to walk away. He turned from the door, sat back down, and pulled out his phone. Not to text. Not to tweet. Just to look at a photo of his mother smiling, standing next to him at the Fruitvale Station premiere. The movie that made them finally see him. That film had broken something open in him, a need to speak out, to hold space for the people like Oscar Grant who never got to. Since then, every red carpet, every press tour, every studio chair had been a quiet rebellion. A chance to push, to peel back the polite version of blackness the industry preferred. A knock on the door startled him. It was Julia, the show's stage coordinator, clipboard in hand and smile a little too tight. They're ready for you. Can I bring you to the wings? Michael nodded. His voice didn't work yet. As they walked down the hallway, he passed Kyle, who smiled as if nothing had happened. As if Michael hadn't heard every syllable. Jimmy wasn't with him now, probably getting MI seat or reviewing cue cards. Kyle offered a half-hearted, "Good to see you again, man." Michael stared at him for a beat too long, then offered a small nod. Not a greeting. A warning. And Kyle knew it. They reached the stage wings. The lights were harsher here, buzzing against the floor like static. Michael adjusted his jacket. His thoughts flicked to Chadwick Boseman. To what it meant to be visible and invisible at the same time. The burden of being someone's hope, someone's proof that it was possible to rise without apology. But the higher he climbed, the lonelier it got. No one warned him that with every movie poster, every box office win, he'd be expected to smile through the mockery dressed as comedy. And when he didn't, they'd call him too serious, too sensitive, difficult. A stagehand gave him the 5-second cue. The door opened. Music swelled. And he walked into the light, carrying the weight of a moment no one would ever see, except him. But it had already begun to twist something inside him. The smile he wore was flawless, practiced, automatic. But it was also his armor now. Because what no one watching knew was that Michael wasn't just walking onto a stage. He was stepping into a war zone disguised as a talk show set. And tonight, he wasn't leaving any part of himself in the dressing room. The lights burned brighter than usual, or maybe it just felt that way to Michael as he stepped onto the set with applause ringing in his ears. He moved with practiced ease, his body language open and confident, but inside, everything was coiled tight. The crowd didn't know, the crew didn't know, and even Jimmy, grinning behind his desk, cue cards fanned out like a deck of tricks, didn't know just how close the line had become. As Michael sat down, the usual back and forth began, the host offering pleasantries and teasing remarks with a rhythm honed over decades of television. Michael nodded along, let out a few courteous laughs, responded to the opening softball questions about workouts, the new film, and his co-star's funny on-set habits. But something beneath the surface of the conversation was off-kilter. Jimmy's tone was laced with something sharper than irony. A dig here. A wink there. He joked about Michael's reputation for never smiling in interviews, about how he brings a little social justice to every superhero movie. The audience laughed, but it was uneasy laughter, the kind that waits for the person being targeted to laugh too. Michael didn't laugh. His smile stayed put, but it didn't reach his eyes. The camera zoomed in. He leaned forward, tilting his head slightly, eyes narrowing just enough for those watching closely to sense the shift. "You know, Jimmy," he said, voice smooth but steady, "you make a lot of jokes for someone who doesn't seem to listen much." The air tightened. Jimmy blinked, surprised, then forced a chuckle. "Whoa, hey, relax, man. I'm just messing around. That's what we do here." The crowd tittered. Michael didn't flinch. "You call it messing around," he said, "but you've been mocking the same things for years, like they're just punchlines, not real people's lives." The laughter died. The sound guy's hand hovered near the volume fader. In the control room, producers exchanged glances. Jimmy's smile stiffened. He shuffled the cards in front of him. "Buying time." "All right," he said, his voice higher now. "You want to talk real stuff, let's talk. You're always talking about how the media silences voices like yours. Here's your platform. Say what you need to say." He pushed back from his desk slightly, gesturing like he was giving permission. Michael's eyes flicked to the camera, then back to Jimmy. "That's the thing, man. You don't give the platform. The platform exists because people like me fought for it. What you're doing is inviting me here to tame it. To laugh it down. To make it comfortable for your audience." The silence in the studio was deafening. No one moved. The cue card assistant dropped her marker without realizing. Michael continued, voice unwavering. "I came here tonight thinking maybe it'd be different. But then I heard you backstage. Heard you and your producer laughing about how I get preachy. Like being aware is a joke. Like talking about black stories, real stories, is something to roll your eyes at." Jimmy sat still, the color draining slightly from his face. "Okay," he said finally. "We're live, man. We can't." But Michael cut in. "Exactly. We're live. Which is why I'm saying it now. Because I've smiled through this long enough. You don't get to decide when the conversation ends." The control room panicked. A voice crackled through the producer's headset. "Cut to break, now." The director signaled the floor manager, but it was already too late. The audience was glued, mouths slightly open, watching a moment no one had planned for. Michael leaned back in his seat, composed but fierce. "You know what I realized? You're more uncomfortable with my honesty than I am with your mockery. That's why this feels like a threat to you." Jimmy, caught with no script to hide behind, reached for a joke, anything to diffuse the tension. "You've always been passionate, Michael, but maybe tonight you're letting it get the best of you." Michael's laugh was sharp and hollow. "No, Jimmy. Tonight I'm finally letting it show." A red light blinked on. "We're out in 5, someone whispered. 3, 2. The feed cut to a commercial. The screen went black. In homes across America, viewers were left staring at an ad for shampoo, their minds reeling from what had just unfolded. Back in the studio, no one clapped. No one moved. Michael slowly removed his microphone and placed it on the seat beside him. He stood up, looked at Jimmy one last time, and then turned away without a word. The host stayed frozen, unsure whether to chase, apologize, or spin it into a monologue. Behind the curtain, the crew scrambled, phones buzzed, and panic rippled like electricity. But in the silence that followed, one truth echoed louder than applause ever could. Michael hadn't come to play the game. He'd come to expose it. The moment the broadcast cut to commercial, it was as if the studio itself exhaled sharply, releasing the tension that had choked the room for nearly 10 straight minutes. But the silence that followed wasn't relief, it was recoil, the kind of stunned stillness that descends after something fragile has shattered beyond repair. A flurry of movement erupted as crew members scrambled to their stations, earpieces buzzing with frantic voices from the control booth trying to regain composure. The stage manager bolted forward, attempting to corral the chaos with hands that trembled slightly, while Jimmy stayed seated, fingers tapping the edge of his desk with forced calm, his smile gone, his posture hunched beneath the weight of what had just unraveled in front of millions. Michael stood at the edge of the stage, unmicked now but not silent, as he turned to the crowd still recovering from the verbal detonation they had just witnessed. He looked not at Jimmy, not at the crew, but at the audience, those seated just feet away, who had come expecting punchlines and were handed a raw confrontation instead. Their expressions were a mix of awe, confusion, and discomfort. One woman in the second row actually looked like she might cry. Then Jimmy rose. Slow. Careful. His voice was low but tight with restraint. You didn't need to go there, Mike. You really didn't. Michael turned to him, no longer masking the fire behind his calm. I didn't go anywhere, you didn't push me, he said. I just stopped pretending it was okay. The producer who had laughed backstage, Kyle, emerged from the side curtain, face pale and sweating. We need to talk, Michael, he said, trying to usher him offstage, but Michael raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Talk? Michael repeated, incredulous. You want to talk now, after you mocked me and every kid who sees me as more than just a damn actor? The entire backstage corridor could hear the echo, and it ricocheted through the walls like a slap. A camera operator instinctively raised a shoulder rig, trying to capture the backstage confrontation. Another assistant barked, "Get that lens off him." No footage. But it was too late. The moment had already become something more than television. It had become truth caught in motion. Security arrived, not aggressively, not with force, but with that awkward hesitance reserved for celebrities. They moved toward Michael, unsure if they were meant to guide, protect, or contain him. One of them muttered something into a walkie-talkie, and another whispered, "We just need to get you out, man, this is escalating." Michael looked around at the dozens of people who had made their living from crafting illusion, from filtering pain into humor, injustice into monologue bits. "No need," he said quietly. "I'm leaving." He walked past Jimmy without another glance, and past Kyle, who lowered his eyes. The audience still hadn't been dismissed, and their murmurs were growing louder. Some clapped. Some didn't. Some just sat in stunned silence, watching a story they knew would be retold and re-edited 1,000 different ways by morning. As Michael pushed through the heavy studio doors into the hallway beyond, a production assistant jogged after him, trying to hand him a coat he hadn't asked for. "It's cold out," she said, breathless. He paused for a second, took it with a nod, and kept walking. Outside, the paparazzi had already gathered, tipped off by someone inside. Flashbulbs burst as soon as the door swung open, but Michael didn't flinch. He kept his head high, walking straight toward his car. His driver, an older man who had worked with him for years, looked startled. "Everything all right, Mr. Jordan?" he asked gently. Michael slid into the back seat without answering, the weight of what had just unfolded settling into his bones like lead. As the car pulled away from the curb, the flashes faded into the distance, but his heartbeat didn't slow. Not yet. Back in the studio, Jimmy was pacing in his dressing room, jacket off, tie loosened, his expression dark. "What the hell just happened?" he hissed at Kyle, who stood rigid, not sure how to answer. "We're gonna get crucified," Jimmy muttered. "We can spin it," Kyle said quickly. "Maybe issue a statement, say it was a misunderstanding." "You don't spin that," Jimmy snapped. "He called us out. On live TV." His hands ran through his hair. And worst part is, he's not wrong. The admission hung in the air like smoke. But truth, once aired out, has a way of sticking to the walls. The PR team arrived within minutes, already drafting apologies, potential talking points, prepping a sanitized version of what had occurred. Meanwhile, the studio buzzed like a shaken hornet's nest, interns gossiping in the stairwells, camera crews uploading footage to backup servers, and showrunners making hushed calls to network executives who were already being bombarded with media inquiries. Michael's phone buzzed non-stop in the back of the car. Calls, texts, headlines stacking up faster than he could read. Michael B. Jordan storms off Kimmel after on-air clash. Actor confronts Jimmy Kimmel over racism, live. Talk show spirals into chaos. But none of it mattered now. The noise would build. The narrative would twist. Some would say he lost control. Others would say he reclaimed it. And still others would say nothing, not knowing what to make of a black man refusing to stay within his assigned frame. As the car curved toward the freeway entrance, Michael leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the silence wrap around him, not as an escape, but as a kind of rebirth. By dawn the next morning, Michael B. Jordan's name wasn't just trending, it was everywhere. Across television broadcasts, podcasts, Twitter threads, and Instagram reels, the confrontation that exploded on Jimmy Kimmel Live had become the cultural epicenter of a nationwide conversation. Networks replayed the clip on a loop, dissecting every glance, every pause, every word, while social media fed on the outrage, awe, and confusion like a wildfire. Supporters flooded timelines with praise, calling Michael brave, unapologetic, a symbol of controlled fury that had been simmering beneath Hollywood's polished exterior for decades. Others, more guarded, more uncomfortable, called him unprofessional, too emotional, claiming he had hijacked the show and disrespected the platform that had made him. In the span of just a few hours, he had become both a hero and a headline, both a martyr and a mirror. The truth, as always, was far more complicated. The studio remained tight-lipped in the immediate hours after the incident, issuing only a brief statement that they were evaluating the situation. But the absence of clarity only fueled speculation. Was the confrontation staged for publicity? Was it a breakdown? Or had something deeper been brewing behind the scenes that audiences had never been allowed to see? By mid-morning, cell phone footage from the backstage hallway had surfaced. A blurry video of Michael brushing off security as he walked toward the exit, his jaw clenched, his voice raised but clear. The words "You don't get to laugh at us and then expect our silence" echoed through speakers worldwide, clipped and captioned by millions. In one frame, he was power personified. In another, a threat to the carefully managed smiles of late-night television. In response, Jimmy Kimmel emerged with a pre-recorded apology aired at the top of the following night's show. His tone was measured, his words polished, and yet something about it felt pre-packaged, like it had been drafted in a legal office before it ever reached the teleprompter. He spoke of respect, misunderstanding, the complexities of public dialogue, and emphasized how much he admired Michael as both a talent and a voice for change. But there was no mention of the backstage remarks. No direct confrontation of the joke that lit the fuse. Instead, the apology came wrapped in neutrality, in the kind of non-statement that satisfied executives but rang hollow to viewers who had watched every beat of Michael's fury unfold. Comment sections tore the segment apart. "This isn't an apology," one viewer tweeted, "it's a PR bandage on a bullet wound." Michael, meanwhile, had disappeared from public view. No tweets, no interviews, no official comment. His silence became its own conversation. Reporters speculated on his mental state, his career trajectory, whether he'd been blacklisted or quietly courted by rival networks. Every photo of him walking through an airport or dining at a low-key restaurant was scrutinized like surveillance footage. Some expected him to break down, to come crawling back with regret. Others waited for him to double down. But instead, something else happened. Without warning or promotion, a short teaser trailer appeared on his official YouTube channel 3 days after the incident. It featured no music, no narration, just black and white footage of Michael sitting in a chair, staring directly into the camera as the words "coming soon" my voice faded onto the screen. Within minutes, the internet imploded. The trailer was followed a week later by the release of a raw, intimate documentary that had been in the works for months but was now arriving with haunting precision. Titled My Voice, Beyond the Lines, the project was part memoir, part manifesto, a compilation of interviews, personal footage, and unscripted reflections on identity, fame, grief, and race in an industry built on controlling narratives. In it, Michael opened up like never before. He spoke of the loss of Chadwick, of the exhaustion that came with smiling through microaggressions, of the weight of becoming a symbol instead of a man. He revealed that the night at Kimmel's studio was not a breakdown but a breaking point. The moment he chose to let the world see what had always been true, he was done playing nice for comfort's sake. The documentary received critical acclaim, with critics calling it searing, urgent, and a reckoning disguised as art. Celebrities began speaking out, some emboldened by Michael's defiance, others scrambling to distance themselves from the controversy. Invitations to other late-night shows followed, but Michael declined them all. "I'm not here to be repaired by the system that bruised me," he said in one segment. "I'm here to build something new." His words echoed like a vow. By the second week, public opinion had shifted. What once seemed like a PR disaster had transformed into a moment of cultural recalibration. Think pieces filled op-ed pages, exploring how television, especially late-night comedy, had long disguised cruelty as wit and how Michael's refusal to accept it was not a disruption but a demand. Memes faded, and nuance returned. Activist circles cited his speech as a call to arms. Young actors spoke of him as a lighthouse in a storm. A new generation began referencing not just his performances but his principles. And still, Michael stayed quiet. Not withdrawn, not defeated, but watching. Listening. Moving on his own terms now. No longer answering to the expectations of a smile timed to a laugh track. It wasn't the awards, the headlines, or the industry accolades that gave Michael's message permanence, it was the quiet that followed. Not the silence of retreat, but the stillness of someone who had said what needed to be said and then stepped back to let it echo. Months had passed since the night of the televised confrontation, but the tremor it sent through Hollywood had not settled. The studio system had tried to return to normal, repackaging controversy as content and pretending nothing had truly shifted, but something had cracked in the foundation. Talk shows tightened their scripts, publicists prepped their clients twice as hard, and hosts who once thrived on edgy jokes found themselves stumbling over punchlines they could no longer deliver with the same smug confidence. Beneath the surface, a recalibration had begun, and at the center of that quiet storm stood Michael B. Jordan, no longer just an actor or a name in the credits, but a symbol of what happens when someone refuses to be complicit in their own soft-spoken erasure. He didn't reappear on another late-night couch. Instead, he launched a media initiative, a production house that prioritized untold stories and creators from backgrounds often ignored. He called it Echo House, a nod to the idea that truth, once spoken, reverberates. Projects greenlit under the banner included raw indie films, experimental documentaries, and mentorship labs for young Black and brown filmmakers. He wasn't just talking about change anymore, he was building the scaffolding for it. The first film released under Echo House's name debuted at Sundance and won the Grand Jury Prize. It wasn't a glossy biopic or blockbuster. It was a small, aching story about a boy who never learned to cry until his mother died. It resonated like thunder. But perhaps the most powerful moment came during an unannounced livestream, months after the Kimmel incident, when Michael sat alone in a bare room. No PR handlers, no flashy graphics, and spoke directly to his audience. He didn't rehearse. Didn't polish. He just spoke. He spoke of feeling trapped in curated interviews, of being reduced to the good Black man in a town that applauded him for being articulate but never listened when he stopped smiling. He talked about grief, of losing Chadwick, of burying another friend to violence, of how fame had insulated him from pain but never cured it. And then, after a long pause, he said something no one expected. "The night I walked off that set, I wasn't angry," he said, looking into the lens like it was a mirror. "I was free. For the first time in a long time, I stopped performing. Not for the cameras. Not for comfort. Not for applause. I was just real." The chat exploded. Hearts. Tears. Messages scrolling by faster than anyone could read. But he didn't flinch. "I know some people think I ruined my image," he continued. "But if your image doesn't reflect your truth, then it's not worth protecting." The feed ended without fanfare, without outro music or branded logos. It just faded to black. In the aftermath, media coverage shifted. Not entirely. Not overnight. But meaningfully. There were still critics, still networks that refused to book him, still whispers in studio corridors about whether he was safe or unstable. But the myth of him being just another actor, another beautiful face for someone else's story, was gone. He had rewritten himself in real time, refusing the polished biography they had prepared and choosing instead the rawness of becoming. In private, his circle grew smaller. Tighter. Friends who understood the weight of his silence before he ever spoke. He turned down blockbuster roles, accepted indie projects that terrified him, and poured his soul into stories with no guarantees of return. His fans followed. His peers took notice. But he never once stepped back into that studio. Jimmy Kimmel, for his part, continued on. His show recovered in the ratings. The scandal faded for some. But something in his delivery had changed. A trace of hesitation before every joke. A hint of caution in every interview. And though he never spoke about Michael again publicly, Those closest to the show knew the mark had been made. The night Michael walked off had become a ghost in the rafters, an invisible line no one dared cross again. Behind closed doors, even Jimmy acknowledged the shift. Not out loud, but in his pacing, in the rewrites, in the occasional, heavy silence between rehearsals. And then came the final revelation, one not broadcast, but shared quietly, person to person, until it spread like truth often does. A leaked email. A rejected interview offer. The news that Jimmy had reached out privately to Michael with a real apology, this time not televised, not PR approved, just a letter. Handwritten. No cameras. No audience. Michael never replied. He didn't need to. Some things, once broken, aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to remind. And so the story didn't end with a reunion or a comeback tour. It ended with a man choosing peace over platform, truth over optics, and legacy over legacy building. Michael B. Jordan had been kicked off a show, but in doing so, he stepped into something infinitely more powerful. His own voice. And in the echoes that followed, the world was finally forced to listen.